Academy Award-winning editor Paul Hirsch began his career by collaborating with director Brian De Palma on a batch of films that included Blowout and Carrie. From there, it was a bit of a genre shift as he went on to edit a thing called Star Wars for a guy named George Lucas. Over the decades, his reel has expanded to include more than 40 films, including the John Hughes classics Ferris, Bueller's Day Off, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is playing here tonight at the Music Box Theater. And that's why Mr. Paul Hirsch is sitting next to me here tonight. Thanks for coming. I'm honored, and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We'll begin with tonight's festivities. How cool is it to see a film that you worked on decades ago to generate this kind of enthusiasm and this kind of a crowd in a Chicago cinema?
It's very rewarding, and people don't remember that when it opened, it didn't win the weekend. The studio was disappointed because we didn't come in #1 that weekend, and a picture called Three Men and a Baby, which we thought was an inferior picture, got the biggest response from the audience at the time. We had hoped that we were making a picture that would become a sort of perennial holiday classic that people would go back to year after year, and it sort of has turned out that way. But the initial results were a little disappointing.
And I don't want to be controversial, but I agree with you on the comparison to Three Men and a Baby. This one has a shelf life that is resilient. What gives a film that sort of resilient and shelf life? And did you realize that it had that while you were working on it?
Well, when you're working on a picture, you're always trying to make it as good as you can. You always have hopes that it will be received by the audience and will have the kind of success that will guarantee that it's seen by a lot of people. But you can never tell. Sometimes pictures vanish over the years, and others stick around and they become cult classics. I've worked on some pictures that were utter failures. A couple of De Palma's pictures were big flops at the time, and eventually have become cult classics. So the release of a picture is sort of like its birth, and some of them go on to have distinguished lives.
And we're going to talk about some of the distinguished lives of some of your films a little bit later, but speaking of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, what was it like to work with John Hughes? And on this picture in particular, what were the challenges and rewards of the editing process?
Well, that's a very broad question on which I could speak for quite a long time. And
excellent, go ahead.
And we're going to do it on stage tonight.
Oh, okay.
So,
a little sneak preview of what?
Well, John shot a lot of film on this picture, and the first cut was 3 hours and 45 minutes. It was the longest first cut of any picture I've ever done. They shot for 85 days, which is the kind of schedule you'd have on an action picture, and this was a two-man comedy, although there was a lot of locations. But there was an enormous amount of film, and I remember coming out of dailies one day after seeing 3 hours of material for the first motel scene. And I turned to my crew and I said, we just watched more film for one scene than the whole film can run. And that was one day out of 85. So we had a phenomenal amount of film. And it was a real challenge to get through it, to get it down to the size that it is today within the time frame that we had. It was like laying track in front of an oncoming locomotive. We were under a lot of pressure, and with a cut that long to start with, you go down a lot of false alleys.
Do you have a standard process for getting over that initial overwhelming shock of a bunch of footage and then getting your mindset focused on the pure editing, on the editing process?
Thankfully, no, because it hasn't happened to me very much. Most of my first cuts are within reach of the target length, although Ray was also a long first cut. It was around 3 hours. But, directors like long films, and for a while there, the pictures that were winning the best film Oscar every year were very long pictures. So directors who had ambitions in that regard were encouraged to make their pictures long, to make them, I guess, more important.
And in your role, you described it a year ago in an interview as an interpretive art.
Yes.
You have to understand and interpret the intention of the director.
Yeah, by interpretive art I mean that I don't sit there every day with a blank canvas in front of me or a blank page needing to fill it up. To me it's like a dancer who waits to hear what the music is and then interprets the music through the dance. So I get the dailies, I know what the intention is, but I still have to interpret it through my own choices about which takes to use, what order to put them in, when to get into a shot, when to get out of a shot, and, these are all choices that 20 different editors would make 20 different versions.
Yes, of course, and leads to the next question. On which films was your initial interpretation spot on in terms of the director's vision, and which films required...
Marriage Story and Theater 2.
And there we go. And which films required a little bit more back and forth before you got on the same page?
It's not so much being on the same page as how successful the script and the shooting goes. For instance, Empire Strikes Back, we locked picture 1 month after the end of shooting, except for the visual effects, which came in gradually. But essentially, the picture was locked 1 month after the completion of principal photography. That's because the script was so good, and there was not a lot of fiddling around. Other pictures I've worked on, the editing process is extended by difficulties in the script, flaws that weren't perceived before we started shooting. And, there are various reasons why.
And you said a lot of the choices you make are based on your background in music. So what is your background in music, and what's the greatest visual rhythmic kind of challenge you've ever encountered while editing?
Well, I studied music. I majored in music at the High School of Music and Art in New York, and I was a percussionist. And you'll find that many editors were drummers.
Oh yeah.
So it's all about timing. Mm-hmm. And film and music are forms that require control of the rhythm, the internal rhythms, as well as the tempo and the overall length. So there's a very close relationship between the two. What was the second question?
The greatest rhythmic challenge you've ever faced? What director, Planes, Trains, they give you all that footage, what a task that they presented to you?
Yeah, that's hard, because it's easy to cut down a movie that's bad. It's no problem taking out the bad stuff. But if you're confronted with a lot of good material, you have to consider how does it fit into the overall scheme. Even if it's good, it may have to go for the benefit of the film overall. Like, amputating a limb to save the patient, kind of thing.
Yeah, of course. Can I jump to Star Wars real quick now? What was your initial perception of Star Wars, and at what point did you realize you had such a classic on it? Did you have a eureka moment?
No, I was very excited to work on it. I had seen production stills while it was shooting. I did not start Star Wars. I came onto it late. I was the last editor hired, and eventually I wound up finishing the film. But I think all told 4 of us worked on the picture, and I, by virtue of having been on it the longest, was given the first position in the credits, which was George's choice.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you. So, yeah, I was, the picture had been cut or put together in a way that was not working, and our task was to make it work.
Excellent. And we're also talking about a current thing you have happening right now, your book.
Yes.
How rewarding was it? Obviously, it's been within you for decades. How rewarding was it to finally get it out there? And then finally, what's next for Paul Hirsch?
Well, the book is very rewarding because being an editor is a subordinate position. All my choices are subject to review and revision by the director. Much like an actor will do 10 takes he doesn't know which of the 10 takes the directors want to use. So he makes choices in each of the 10 takes, and he's not really certain which choice that he made will be endorsed. So it's sort of like that with me, not exactly, but the protocol in films is that the director makes the decisions. With the book, I was making the decisions. I was the writer, I was the director, the editor, and it was very satisfying not to submit my choices to somebody else for a decision about it.
And forgive me, but the title of the book, it's one of those long ones.
The title of the book is A Long Time Ago in a Cutting Room Far, Far Away. And then it says, My 50 Years Editing Hollywood Hits, and it lists a number of my films.
Excellent. And that is Academy Award-winning editor Paul Hirsch here at the Music Box Theater. This is Dan Patton reporting for Real Chicago. Thanks for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.